Chapter 241. Clearing the Fields. The big project on most of the farms was to harvest the volunteer grain that had been growing wild in the fields so that they had seed for a proper crop and then some leftover for flour if possible. Most of that had to be done by hand, as there were so many other plants mixed in the fields, but the Ravi family's workers had found themselves a field that was nearly all potatoes, and they had most of the family out digging them. A ton of potatoes might not be quite as versatile in the kitchen as a ton of grain, but it was close. Plus, the fact that they were going to be able to dig it up and put it in the cellars once those were cleaned was enough to make any other refugee jealous. Dominic stopped where they were working, and Omar Khalil, the current head of the family and former guard captain of Kosman, came over to say hello. "My lord, how can we help you today? If you happen to recover more than you need, I will buy the excess potatoes for the manor's pantry. The cook is always happy to see more fresh food incoming, and they're good for nearly everything." Dominic explained. "That works for us. With so many of us, we will have more than enough coming out of this field." "How much is the manor willing to take?" he asked. "Well, we've got a fairly decent garden, but between potato bread and side dishes, I would say that the manor will need at least a ton before the next harvest. But I will take 2 tons if you gather that many," Dominic explained. They would get some of that themselves, but he was also expecting guests, which would increase their consumption. The former guard captain chuckled. "We can do that. This is almost all potatoes, and even with the loss to weeds and grass, there are 40 acres of potato plants here. We're likely to fill the entire storage cellar at the old farmstead and still have more to distribute. Honestly, if we get the garden witch out here a few times a month, we will have to send weekly merchant trains back to the cities, or we will run out of space for food storage." "That's the sort of news that I love to hear. All right, I will go check on the others." "Did you need anything urgently?" Dominic replied. Omar shook his head. "We've found 3 good carts that can be pulled by the men, and we'll be days trying to clear this field. There wasn't an implement to pull potato plants, so it's all pitchforks. But you can only ask for so much out of a free farm." Such an implement surely existed, but there was a good chance that nobody here ever had one. Originally, there were enough witches in the area that they probably just used magic to plant and harvest half the crops. Dominic checked in on the new tractors next and topped off their bunker with coal so that they could keep working for a few days. Nobody needed anything but time to settle in and a good meal, so Dominic finished his rounds with the Aleda family. They hadn't arrived with much, and they were cramped into a small farmhouse, which now had a large yurt set up next to it. But they had also had good luck with vegetables of all sorts in the fields they had claimed, and the more able-bodied were now out cutting corn, which was past ready to harvest. "It looks like your pantry will be all right," Dominic greeted the old general. The elder Alater family members all smiled and nodded happily. "We're waiting to put anything in the root cellar. We've cleaned it out, but we found hundreds of canning jars, and the lids had been stored in cooking oil, so they're not rusted at all. Once we get them sanitized, I will start making soup for storage." "Is the mill working?" "We will have lots of corn to grind after we set aside for seed." "Of course. If you don't have the constitution, ask one of the younger folk to help. It's a Magitech mill, no need to hitch an animal to it. I don't think that anyone has used it yet, so it might need cleaning." Dominic agreed. "Then we will see you soon." Dominic returned to the manor that night in high spirits, which only got better when he smelled dinner and saw the smile on Alexis' face. "I take it that the message to the king went well?" he asked. "Better than anyone could have hoped for. Castle City is asking for relief supplies, and they're paying a premium. I promised that we would inform the Merchants Guild when they get here with the next convoy. Even with their cut, if we can gather enough crops to fill even 1 or 2 bulk wagons, it will cover the expenses of the families we've got here for months," she explained. "I will inform them tomorrow. They're doing really well at harvesting what was already growing. It's uncanny, like the crops were native to the area." Dominic replied. "That's because of the good magic." Millie's voice informed them from the kitchen. "Was there still garden witch magic active here, Millie?" Alexis called back. "Yep, lots of it. All over. I wonder where she went." The half-elf's voice trailed off at the end as she got distracted by something in the kitchen, but Alexis just nodded in satisfaction. "So, It looks like your initial suggestions of multiple magic users in town wasn't so far-fetched after all. We've already got more skilled magic users than a small city, and we don't even have a mercantile store yet. She joked. Actually, we do. The Khalil family will operate it, and they've already ordered inventory. We will have to see what sort of people the Merchants Guild brings us with the next batch. We might have more than just the basics by next month. Chapter 242. Good friends to have. It was 6 days before the Merchant Guild's next caravan came trundling down the road, much larger than Dominic had expected. They had no fewer than 30 trucks, tractors pulling trailers and other vehicles in the convoy, plus dozens of men on horseback accompanying the convoy as guards. It wasn't just a hired refugee caravan. They had rerouted a full convoy through Westover on its way to Castle City, instead of keeping it on the main roads. Dominic went out to meet them in the village, where the convoy was pulling to a stop in the central square. The Merchant Guild representative this time was not the same man, but they recognized him immediately, and the merchant came out with a huge smile for him. Your Grace, you honor us with your presence. I have brought the order for the Khalil Mercantile Store, and I've got a few more hopeful new arrivals, plus your order for the manor. Did you have anything that you would like to trade us to be shipped further into Signia? He asked. Dominic nodded. Indeed I do. The new villagers have been working hard to gather the wild foodstuffs, and now that our own pantries are beginning to fill, we have some excess that can be sold if you have bulk produce wagons empty. The king requested that food relief be sent to Castle City if we had anything to spare, and despite our recent arrival, we still do. The merchant smiled. I was hoping that you would say something like that. I have 3 wagons empty right now, and a carrying capacity of 15 tons. That was a pretty significant amount of food to be shipping from such a new estate, the merchant knew. But it was considered polite to have more space than they could possibly need. Plus, it was good for business if someone surprised you with an especially good crop. Dominic chuckled. Well, we could load the entire 15 tons with bulk potatoes, as we've had a rather bountiful harvest of them. But I suspect that other farmsteads would like to sell to you as well. The caravan hadn't been missed, and everyone was sending in their goods now, with the tractors making a loop to hook up wagons. A few men exited the convoy and came to stand behind the Merchant Guild member, waiting for his introduction to the local Duke. Duke Dominic, these are the heads of family for the migrant workers we've brought. All are debt-free and came with their whole families. All were solvent when they left their homes, choosing to live in a region with a more amenable sort of nobility. He explained. Every one of them is Wavemate's resistance, true and loyal to the Dragon King's lineage. They are all led by skilled workers, and they've shown no reluctance to living under the rule of the King of Signia, so long as it's within your duchy. He explained. Dominic nodded. In that case, you can all register with Julio, my castellan. He knows what houses are most suitable to each of your family's specialties and what farms have the best chance at filling a pantry with crops even before you turn the land. Welcome to Westover. I am not looking to fill the village with rebels. My marriage with the princess was a chosen match, not a political union, and I don't want trouble with the king. The merchant smiled as he ushered the family heads toward Julio. Of course, your grace. The resistance has no intention of fighting against the Signia kingdom, so long as they allow the Dragon King's successors to live within Wavemates. That wasn't as reassuring as Dominic had hoped, but he could sense a lot of magic coming from the people in the carriages. Did you have everything that we ordered for the manor? He asked. The merchant nodded. Of course, your grace. Nothing on your list was difficult to find. We've also brought you 1 more coal-powered tractor for the duchy. Did you have more of the same trade items you bartered to the last representative? The head of our guard detail is most eager to get his hands on that sort of item. If the man could afford that, he either had quite the savings or excellent credit with the guild. Dominic nodded and took out 2 rare-grade mana revolvers, which should cover everything that they had ordered, including 1 tractor. The merchant handed the 2 revolvers to the head guard, who sighed wistfully as he held them. Thank you, Lord Dominic. I have worked years to afford these when I managed to find them. Ironic, really, that most would sell a house suitable to become a baron's manor or an acreage on the edge of the city to obtain one, and 1 duke has provided 4 to the Merchants Guild so far. Good times are coming to Stantia province. I can feel it now. he joked, speaking in a quiet tone that wouldn't carry far. Dominic winked at him. Rebuilding back to the former glory of the Westover Manor might take some time, but we will get there. Now that we've got the essentials, we should be able to host guests without embarrassing ourselves. That notion made the guard laugh. Out of all the noble estates they had passed, not counting the ones that were abandoned, Westover Estate was already doing better than average. They had full pantries, food to sell, good water, and steam tractors working the fields. Not just one, either. There was a small one in the hay field, but there were 3 large ones as well, and the Duke had just purchased a 4th. Just on the amount of Magitech equipment that they had working the estate, they were already obscenely wealthy compared to most of the Dagos barons. Plus, one of the new arrivals in this trip was a carriage maker who specialized in steam trucks. With a new cobbler and a few families of farmers, including a sheep farmer who had brought a whole flock with him, Westover Manor was quickly overtaking the average in every metric. But more than that, there was magic here. The Duke, the Duchess, the royal guard who accompanied her, even most of the farmers had more than a little magic at their disposal. Chapter 243. Order is in. While Julio took care of settling the new arrivals, Alexis came out to inspect the trade goods before they were unloaded. She wasn't sure if the Merchants Guild had gotten the order right, as it had been placed through Julio and then passed to Dominic, so the relay effect could have altered the instructions from what she was actually looking for. Your Highness, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Would you like to inspect the textiles first? The merchant asked. Alexis nodded. Yes, that would be perfect. Then the farrier can inspect the livestock you brought, and either Lord Dominic or the Castellan can verify the magical items I requested. Dominic frowned. They didn't have a huge budget to order magical items, and especially not when they could have the techno-wizards here make them. However, what Alexis had ordered was not something that just anyone would know how to make. She had requested a Magitech incubator for chickens, which took up a large crate on its own, and then there was an electric fence generator. That was something that Dominic or Pops could have made on their own, but it was understandable that anyone who wasn't a magical engineer would think that it was more complex than it was. One of the families relocated their sheep farm, and we brought you 2 stable hands for the horses and chickens. We were going to bring more household staff, but the warning that you gave the Merchants Guild in Skypington dissuaded the boss from sending any of the fallen noble girls. None of us wanted to be the one on the hook when some airhead tried to rise above her station and got herself executed as an unauthorized concubine. The merchant explained. Alexis chuckled at his words, which he hadn't thought that she would be able to hear. She didn't know what Dominic had told the guild, but they had certainly taken it to heart. It was good that they didn't send a bunch of pampered girls looking to sleep their way back into the nobility, though. Especially given that they were likely to be Dagos nobility or raised by nobles that many would view as traitors from wavemates. Neither of them would fare well attempting to seduce Dominic. While Alexis was inspecting the fabrics, carpets, and drapery that she had ordered, a pair of young women came over to speak to her. Highness, might you be looking for house hands? We're good with the chickens, odd jobs, and cleaning. We paid for a ride to Castle City, but once we were on the road, we learned that it might not be the best place to end up. One of the girls asked. Alexis turned and inspected them. Both were in their mid or late teens, dressed in heavily worn servants' uniforms with their former emblems carefully removed. But it was the desperation hidden behind the hopeful smiles and fake confidence that convinced her. All right, talk to Tenna at the manor. She's the head gardener, and she will find you work. Help them bring the chickens up with you. She agreed. A quick mental calculation said that they still had servants' rooms left in the manor, enough that Beth could hire her whole kitchen staff out of the newly arrived families if she wanted. Other than that, they should have more than enough other workers now. As the new arrivals exited the trucks, more space began to come available, and the farmers began to arrive with their wagons full of food products. The most abundant were the potatoes and turnips, but there was an entire wagon full of carrots and onions and a few baskets of dragonberries. Alexis saw them and laughed. You can't sell those. They're poison to everyone without dragon blood. They smell wonderful, but they're a restricted product insignia. Dominic looked up. Oh, I will take those. Be careful with them, as even licking the juice off your fingers could knock you out. The woman who had collected them looked horrified, staring at her hands, which were stained with berry juice. One of the men offered her a clean rag, and she quickly scrubbed her hands clean, then passed Dominic the basket as if it might bite her. Dominic smiled as he put the basket in his storage cube for later. He didn't know if there was anyone else here who could safely eat the berries, but they wouldn't spoil inside a Magitech storage item, so he could simply keep them for a special occasion. They were insignia now, and while the berries were wild, they were also illegal. Keeping them growing in someone's yard could bring the farmers a world of trouble if someone who wasn't as understanding as Dominic was wandered through. He was going to have to work out a plan that would relocate the bushes and not eliminate them so that he didn't turn his favorite pie filling extinct. Come talk to me later about where you found the berry bushes. But first, it's more important that everyone gets their trade goods sold to the guild so that they can get back to the work of establishing their new homesteads. Dominic instructed. Of course, my lord. The locals answered in unison. Nearly every house had dragonberry bushes planted outside, because it wasn't only Dominic that counted them as their favorite pie filling. Originally, most of the residents of town had some measure of dragon blood, and they all had their own recipe for the pie. There might still be a few in town who had dragon blood, but likely a much smaller amount, and the only sure way to let them test it was to have them eat the berries and see who passed out. Though there was a saying that a third of any nation was distantly related to the royal family through the concubines and chambermaids, so he couldn't rule out that the majority of Wavemates' lineages might actually have at least a few drops of dragon blood in them. Alexis smiled as she saw Dominic clearly plotting to save his favorite dessert. They could certainly manage to keep at least a few of the berry bushes around. Everyone would know now that they were toxic, so the commoners would simply treat them as ornamental. At least until it really sunk in that they were insignia now and the laws were different. Chapter 244, Sanctuary Plea. The merchant ended up sending 2 entire trailers full of goods to the manor. Dominic didn't recall ordering that much, but what they were unloading was mostly large items, furniture and drapery, as well as bolts of cloth that would be used to make new dresses once they had a proper seamstress on staff. That would be a harder position to fill. A royal seamstress was a lifetime sort of appointment, unless you did something truly unforgivable. The Signia royal family only had 5 of them in total, and while some fell from favor among certain family members, they always ended up making clothes for a rival instead. Now, they might not be able to find a seamstress up to the royal standard, but Dominic was sure that they would manage to find a decent one eventually. The position was on the list of employees that they had requested for the Merchants Guild to attempt to obtain for them. They weren't expected to find them right away, but they had done pretty well on the rest of the list, and there was a seamstress or tailor in town now. Dominic had seen them on the list. If they were good enough, Alexis would probably go to them for the majority of her clothing purchases. How is the loading going? Dominic asked as the farmers finished emptying their carts. All done. We've got enough coin to get through the season now, as long as we can get the items we need. I think that everyone has a wish list at the toolmaker's forge already, just waiting on coin to pay him with. We've sold him all the food he's willing to take, as he says he eats most of his meals in the manor. But he's been good about making items on credit, as long as they're urgently needed. One of the men explained. Well, now we've got the Khalil family store, and the bakery as well. I see that they both got a sizable shipment from the guild today. I don't think that you should be short on too many of the essentials. Dominic replied. The farmer laughed. Sweets might be hard on the budget, but the mercantile got in smaller bags of sugar, so we can make the simple ones at home. They got plenty of baking powder as well for quick rise biscuits that are nice and fluffy. That was one of the lesser concerns of most of the refugees when they left. But soft biscuits and pancakes made daily life much more tolerable. Dominic was about to return to the manor when a rider in the distance caught his attention. He was riding hard, and the horse was lathered with sweat from the exertion. Not good for the animal, but they could have the new grooms and Jasmine take care of it. He raised his hand to call the rider over, and the man skidded to a stop only a meter short of collision. He was dressed in a ragged Dago's army coat over what looked like it had once been a nobleman's finery. Whoa there! Hop down, and let the animal rest before you ride it to death. Now, what is so urgent? Dominic asked. Sanctuary. The man gasped. Sanctuary. Dominic stared at him for a moment, and then watched how all the locals were either backing away or preparing weapons. "Tell me your name." "We don't offer sanctuary to those who have committed crimes against the people," Dominic demanded. "Jerome Wall, son of Baron Wall," he began, then raised his hands in surrender. "I am not my father. I never swore fealty to Dagos. When my father found out that I had been helping peasants escape into Stantia province after the declaration of reparations, he disowned me, and his men have been chasing me across the country. I bypassed Limpsbury. The guards there might not be accommodating, unless they're all Signia soldiers, and those might just kill me anyhow. So, I beg you, Lord Wavemates, please grant me sanctuary." Dominic hummed as he considered it. "Follow me to the manor. We will discuss it there. If there are no objections, we will grant you sanctuary, and you can remain our guest until the matter of the mercenaries following you is settled," Dominic decided. The Merchants Guild guard closest to Dominic made a discreet hand gesture, drawing his attention. "He's not telling the whole truth. He was a Dagos officer during the Battle of Limpsbury. His father is a right bastard, though." "Thanks." Dominic escorted the fallen noble to the manor, and then to one of the sitting rooms. "All right, we'll start with the easy parts. What was your position in the Dagos army, and what was your last deployment?" Dominic began with. The man should have a story for that, if he was planning to lie. He was still wearing his military jacket, and while it was in bad shape, Dominic took it as a telling sign that he hadn't discarded the last remnants of his uniform. "My last station was in Limpsbury. I was a lieutenant in the city guard. When the city fell, I returned to my home in the north, just outside Kynwyn. Everyone knows that Signia has taken Stantia province, and they announced their intention well in advance. So, the peasantry is desperate to flee across the border. You know how the poor are constantly looking for greener pastures. Well, I saw an opportunity to help them out. The Merchants Guild has refused to service the city of Kynwyn during the war at the request of the Kingdom of Axbridge. But they were happy to buy up the debt contracts for the travel fees to bring loads of peasants back to Limpsbury. The local lords and the patrols all know me, so nobody asked any questions. Until my father found out, that is. He declared me a traitor to Dagos and disowned me from the family," the dark-haired noble son explained. Dominic frowned. "You do realize that none of what you said makes you sound like the good guy, right? Human trafficking, selling refugees into debt contracts, dumping them into an occupied city that is already on the verge of starvation." Jerome froze. Dominic had a point. When you looked at it like that, it didn't sound nearly as altruistic. In fact, if he had phrased it any worse, he might have come across the same as his father, who constantly advocated for the extermination of demi-humans. Chapter 245. What to do with you? Dominic sighed. "Now, what are we going to do with you? By law, I should send you back north across the border. Dagos soldiers hold no legal status within Signia right now, other than that of an invading army. And while you have abandoned your post and have been cast out of your noble family, it doesn't change the fact that you are, in fact, a Dagos soldier. Possibly declared a deserter as well." Jerome nodded. "That's how I ended up looking like this. Word got back that I had been disowned, and the border guards accused me of impersonating a nobleman for wearing the officer's uniform. A capital crime in Dagos, and likely insignia as well. Then, just past Limpsbury, the mercenaries caught up to me, and I lost most of my supplies. You're the first inhabited manor I've seen since. Because they were likely the only inhabited manor house for nearly 200 kilometers in that direction. You are putting me in a tight spot here. I can keep you in the manor, but we've only just begun to renovate, and space is limited. I can't leave you in town. You wouldn't live to see the morning after having shown up in a Dagos army officer's coat. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Dagos nobles weren't very well regarded, even when they controlled the region. So, the options are either to protect you forever by hiring you as a manor worker while granting you sanctuary, make you a prisoner of my estate, or refusing your request." Dominic explained. He already knew what the royal guard would say. They wouldn't want him anywhere in the manor. Jerome frowned. "My lord, I will prove myself to you. 1 week of sanctuary, until the mercenaries are no longer chasing me, and I will become a productive member of society. Dominic frowned. You do understand that you are no longer a noble, yes? Are you trained for any sort of skill that would make you a living as a commoner? The fallen Dago's noble chuckled grimly. Well, I've got plenty of experience felling and splitting wood. I don't suppose that you would be short a woodcutter, would you? Dominic smiled. In fact, we are. All right, I will speak to the royal guard and find accommodation for your stay here. Once we're sure that the mercenaries are no longer after you, you can move to one of the vacant woodcutters' houses on the outskirts. I suggest that you use the intervening time wisely to make good relations with the townsfolk. They'll be your companions and lifeline for the foreseeable future. Colonel Wilkes. Is there an empty guest suite for Jerome? He will need a few days in the manor before he goes out to get acquainted with the village. Once he is situated, he has indicated that he wishes to become a woodcutter. Dominic called, knowing the guard was just around the corner. Understood, Your Grace. But be aware that I am against allowing the defector to stay anywhere except a cell. The royal guard replied. Noted. I believe that he will be on his very best behavior, especially if he intends to remain in the area and not continue to flee for his life. Dominic agreed. Once the pair was gone, Dominic went looking for something to help with around the house. Everything was fairly well under control, so he headed back into the village to work on rebuilding and repairing housing. They still had the Merchants Guild caravan in town, though they would be leaving soon. The new arrivals were sure to need at least a few items put on the list for their new homes, and Dominic preferred to be the one to take their requests so that they could all get to know him. Many lords were only vaguely aware of the peasantry living on their estates except on tax day, but that wasn't his style. So, Dominic was just outside of town, helping a friendly young family with far too many sheep get settled when the mercenaries hunting the fallen nobleman arrived. Dominic raised a hand in greeting, and the riders immediately came over to him, not hiding their weapons or their intentions. My lord, might I ask where we are? The leader of the group asked. Westover Duchy, under the dominion of the King of Signia and myself. Dominic replied. The mercenary bowed in his saddle. Duke Westover, a pleasure to meet you. We have been hired to collect a bounty. Guardsman Jerome Wall is wanted for desertion. Dominic nodded. Dago's warrants don't hold much weight this far into Signia. The mercenary shrugged. Money is money. He smuggled a load of skilled peasants out of Dago's with him, and his father is a smidgen upset about the matter. We don't want to fight with the Duke's estate. We just need the confirmation to get paid. What confirmation do you need? Dominic asked. The family crest that he wears around his neck. His father would prefer if the head was still attached to it, but he's not particular as long as the crest makes its way back to him. Dominic frowned. He is in my dungeon, as I'm sure that you've already realized, as you arrived less than an hour behind him. I will give you your proof, and then ask that you return to your employer. The man's face wrinkled as he smiled, revealing a long scar hidden under his beard. Well, I don't imagine that life is going to get much better for him, even if he grovels and begs to live here as a common pig farmer in some half-populated backwater. No offense to the estate. You have a deal, Your Grace. Dominic nodded. All right, let me grab a guard and have them get the token. One of the older children from the farm perked up at his comment. My lord, I can run that message for you. Dominic smiled and tossed him a copper coin. Tell the guard to bring me the new arrival's family crest. They will understand. The boy took off running, happy to earn the coin. Now that the town had a mercantile store, there was a good chance that even a few errands for Dominic could get him one of the items on his wish list. Chapter 246, Politics of Possession. After a few minutes, one of the Royal Guard members came jogging over in full armor with his visor down, his identity protected from easy detection by the mercenaries. Lord Dominic, I have brought the token. There is a bit of damage, but it is still identifiable as belonging to the son of Baron Wall of Dago's. He explained, then passed Dominic the simple steel family token, which had what looked like it had been hit by either an arrow or a bullet. The blood, if there had been any, had been scrubbed clean, so Dominic nodded and offered it to the mercenaries. Will this do for your bounty? He asked. The mercenary nodded, but the guard raised his hand. Take this as well. I think that it should help settle your employer's mind. The mercenary winced as he saw what was in the small cloth bag that the royal guard handed him, and then nodded. That should settle any questions pretty definitively. Then, they turned and immediately rode back north, as if they were being chased. What was in the bag? Dominic asked quietly. The tattoo from his chest. He knew that they would come for the token, and he didn't mind turning it over, but he thought that they might want proof of death. He explained. I take it that someone healed him? The guard nodded stiffly. They did. Got him a change of clothes as well. We will keep him in the manor for a day or two, until we're sure that they're not coming back to verify. But there are so many fresh graves in the area that I don't think they're going to stick around and see if we're intending to fill any more. Dominic winked at him. Perhaps that will actually work out for the best. I was worried that the curse and folklore would keep people from coming here to settle, but they might actually just work to keep trouble away for a little while. The guard shook his head. We could only wish to be that lucky. No, I suspect that once the Merchant Guild's caravans make a single round trip, we will start getting more new arrivals than we know what to do with, both commoners and nobles who are hoping to claim one of the baronies with your support. Dominic frowned. They can do that? The sound of soft laughter came from under the helmet. If it's an unoccupied barony, meaning that nobody has currently claimed or been awarded it. If you allow someone to move in and start renovations, they will have a basis to petition for the king to grant them land to manage under your supervision, just like any other baron. It might take some time to get their official title recognized, but if they can claim 1,000 acres or more and get enough commoners to move in and work the land, it is all but inevitable. At worst, the king might arrange a marriage between one of their daughters and the baron he has chosen for the territory. So, they will live in peace, and the family lineage will retain noble status for another generation. I don't suppose that I can trick my wife into dealing with that sort of issue? That made the royal guard laugh openly. Good luck with that. Tricking her into doing the work that nobody else wants was never easy, even when she was a mere squire at the royal order. Dominic sighed. I suspected that might be the case. Fortunately, hosting visiting nobles is part of her side of the household duties. I might have to be the one to tell them no, but at least I don't have to put on a friendly face all day, and I can use work as an excuse to delay. The amused guard patted him on the shoulder. Good luck with that, Your Grace. We all look forward to seeing you try. The guard returned to the manor, and Dominic headed for the forge, intending to visit Pops. The old dwarf was making farm tools along with John, the carpenter. They had large tractors now, so they needed larger implements, which were essentially just multiple smaller ones linked together for efficiency. So, that was what they were making now. Once the first crop was picked, they would need to plow and replant. So, the pair were working on a drawbar that would link 3 smaller plows or 3 planters together side by side. They were a combination of steel brackets and wooden arms, which meant both tradesmen were needed. The amount of timber they had was limited, and it all looked freshly cut. But it would have to do for now, and Pops had built some sort of contraption to steam and bend the wood to shape for drying. Dominic had heard that the airship and carriage builders used the same thing, but he had never actually seen one in use. The carriage works next door were already in operation, or at least setting up their tools to start operation, and it had more space. That would let them move some of this work next door if they wanted to outsource. But officially both Pops and John were employees of the duchy and not independent shop owners. How they were going to settle that after John had paid off the debts that Dominic had taken on would have to be worked out later. Dominic didn't intend to take anything from Pops, but the old man was sure to give the locals quite a bit on credit, no matter how he complained about customers only being customers if they were paying. If they gave him trouble about payment later, when they were doing well, Dominic could put pressure on them as the Duke to pay their debts, which might have been what Pops had in mind all along. Doing good deeds was all good, but the dwarf was not one who would be lenient on those who were ungrateful. It just wasn't in his nature. Chapter 247, Noble Casual. Just after dark, the lights in the manor went dark as everyone but the guards on duty turned in for the night. Dominic wrapped his arms around Alexis and pulled her into position as the little spoon, which made the princess giggle. You're incorrigible. You know that we've got an early morning again tomorrow. Dominic kissed her neck. We've got an early morning every morning. But let me tell you a secret. We're actually the boss of them. If we make them wait, they can't stop us. Every fiber of her being urged her to tell him that a paladin was always true to their word, and a princess was never more than fashionably late. But in a way, he had a point. If she informed the staff that she would be starting her day at 10 in the morning, then that was when her day would start. Dominic's voice was soft as he continued. The public areas of the house look wonderful. The books are up to date. The new villagers, farmers, and craftsmen are all settling in as well as can be expected. Nothing we need to do in the morning is urgent. Alexis paused. He was not wrong. You're only telling me the good parts so that you can get some. She reminded him. Don't make me put on the pirate hat and come for that booty. Alexis laughed and rolled them over. You did lock the door, didn't you? And the window, so the soundproofing activated. Two of the veiled maids came in the next morning to help get the princess ready for her day, only to find her already in the shower and whistling happily to herself, while Dominic lay on his back and stared at the curtain over the bed. Her Highness is in a wonderful mood this morning. Is there some special event planned? The maid asked Dominic quietly, so she could prepare. Nothing major. Please ask the kitchen to have breakfast ready in 15 minutes if possible, and we will go through the daily lists. Dominic explained. It will be ready when you get downstairs, my lord. Dominic looked in his wardrobe and realized that he really did need to update so that he could continue to look the part of a duke. He only had a few outfits that were properly noble in nature, and while that was enough for most situations, he needed something that was between his old casual workwear and event finery. Something that he could wear every day without being mistaken as one of the commoners. Appearances were part of the duchy's pride, and the people would lose confidence in a noble who couldn't even look like they could afford to manage a manor. He should add a trip to the tailor to his list of things to do today so that they could have clothing ready over the next week or so. The palace kept clothing in fitted sizes, but now that he was living outside the city, he was not going to find pre-made finery. After all, he was the only customer they might have who would need it. But when he got downstairs, there was already an extensive list of things that needed to be upgraded, repaired, or ordered for the manor, and some of them were going to be very labor-intensive. Perhaps he could get away with his old apprentice's work clothes for a few days after all. The chickens need a proper coop built, so that they are safe from predators. The perimeter wall needs upgrades. The small tractor has a steam leak. Dominic mumbled as he read through the list. Then he nodded. All right, I can take care of most of these things today. There is chicken wire in the barn to put up a coop. I will build a low wall around the area, then top it with chicken wire. The perimeter wall will take more time, but the tractor might be a small thing. Is there anything else that needs my personal attention? The coal supply is running low. There are a few farmers who are using it in their stoves for lack of dried firewood, but mostly it's just that they've had enough time to start clearing full fields, and the tractors are working full-time. Colonel Wilkes explained. There were loaded woodsheds at some of the farmhouses, but nobody wanted to empty supplies that had been left at a farm they didn't pick. So, they were using coal in the stoves for cooking if their house didn't have any wood left. It worked well enough, Dominic supposed. A bit hotter than usual, but it wouldn't hurt anything if they were using it in the stove, and not in an open fire pit. If they were burning in an open fire pit, they wouldn't be worried about green firewood. They could just grab deadfall from the woods. So, Dominic went to the tailor's first, which startled the two competing men who had reluctantly agreed to work together. I need casual wear. Something a bit more dignified than what I used at the Royal Forge, and not a sorcerer's robe. Suitable for day-to-day work. Dominic explained. Both men's faces lit up in joy. They had made a few pieces for the newly arrived families, but almost everyone just wanted bulk cloth, and making custom clothes for the lord was much more lucrative. We don't have the largest supply of material suitable for finery, but we do have some fine cotton for shirts, and dyes for the canvas and linen that will make pants, and a jacket that will serve you well for years. The older of the two tailors agreed. Dominic saw that they had many bolts of patterned cloth as well, suitable for ladies' dresses. Those would be in much higher demand than menswear, which was normally just patched when it wore out. In fact, work pants were designed with a double knee, so that the worn outer layer could be removed and replaced without damaging the pant underneath. Dominic didn't expect them to do the same with his, but they actually had a way that looked much more dignified. It was still a knee reinforcement, but extended all the way up and in a dark red over the black pants. It was a stylish combination, if Dominic could trust their drawings and the cloth sections they held up for him. All right, we will go with that. At least 3 pairs, and they don't have to be the same colors. Then a half-dozen cotton shirts. If you have fine linen and not just coarse, I will take a few linen shirts in white. Dominic decided. Understood, my lord. We will have your order ready by the end of the week. The tailor agreed as he double-checked all the measurements that he had taken of Dominic. Now, off to the hard work. Chapter 248. Safe Chickens. Dominic returned to the manor to start on the tractor repairs, which turned out to be a split seam from old damage, easily patched, and then started on the chicken coop. He just made a low fieldstone wall, with 4 corner pillars and 2 pillars to mark the doorway. Now, he could wrap the whole thing in the wire mesh and start building a door. Simple work, and one of the last major yard improvement projects to be done. The rest had been handled by the others, but the royal guard was insistent that they fix the wall around the manor to make it properly defensible, and that would take the second half of Dominic's day. Possibly more, depending on how exhausting extended use of the fieldstone wall spell turned out to be. The manor never really had a proper wall, it was actually just a hip-high stone field divider to begin with. But the royal guard wanted a proper defensive wall, so that the tragedy that happened here last time would not be repeated, and so that they would have a more visible presence for new arrivals. Walls equaled security, and security meant prosperity in desperate times like this. While this region hadn't suffered from the droughts that most of Dago's had, years of careless management and massive taxation had depleted the coffers of everyone from the peasantry to the nobles assigned to rule over them. Then the war had arrived, and for the second time, the cities of Stantia province had fallen in a matter of days without putting up any sort of notable resistance. That was something that all of them would want to avoid a repeat of. However, only on a smaller scale like the Duke's Manor would it actually be feasible to build a solid stone wall in a reasonable amount of time. Dominic started at the far end of the hay fields and then walked the perimeter of the estate as he erected a stone wall 2.5 meters tall, twice as thick at the base, so that the inside was somewhat sloped and more stable. That would be enough to protect against basic cannon fire, and high enough that most wild beasts and monsters couldn't easily get over. Even ogres would struggle to get past that wall. He could create the wall at a walking pace, but the strain was like walking uphill with a 100-kilo backpack. Only, it was his whole body that was struggling with the pressure, not just his legs. It was better to create it much more slowly. Dominic wasn't one to give up easily, and over the course of the next 5 hours, he made his way around the manor's grounds, including the many outbuildings, the hay fields, and the gardens, including the secondary gardens which hadn't been planted when the attack occurred, and so had nothing in them at the moment. The main garden would be enough to feed the manor, especially with a garden witch present. But with the extra garden, they would have enough to support a guard garrison without relying on the farmers. That would help them through tough times, and allow them to stockpile longer-lasting grains when times were good and the prices were low. Tenna came out to check the secondary garden after Dominic built a small wall around it, and gave him a motherly smile as she watched Dominic working on the main wall, sweating heavily with every step. You know, the Duchy of Westover isn't in such a bad position that you need to plant a secondary garden or rebuild all those storage silos. She commented. Dominic smiled. Oh, I know that. Most of what the Duchy village grows will end up sold to the Merchants Guild. However, I'm not doing this for money, but security. 2 gardens and the fields enclosed within the wall are enough to support the manor's population even under siege. It's not quite a castle, at least not a proper one. But it's a good start at making the sort of noble estate that will convince wealthier merchants and magic users that this is a desirable place to move. The gardener smiled. All right, I won't bother my lord with concerns about overkill. I will ask if you plan to make time in the forge soon. I noticed that Julio has marked a caravan's estimated arrival for the day after tomorrow, and if you're planning to sell them anything, you will still need time to make it. Dominic nodded. As soon as I finish this wall, I am planning to spend the remainder of the evening working on something to sell the caravans. Most of them are more interested in magitech weapons for their guards than anything else, and a day's work on those can buy the duchy another tractor. We're making great progress with 3 of them, but with a few more and some more farmers, we will revolutionize production rates. Tenna shook her head. As you say, Your Grace. I am certain that the peasantry appreciates your generosity. Personally, I had no idea that there could be so much work done by a single person. She gestured toward one of the formerly overgrown fields outside of town, where the tractors were pulling a plow for what had to be its second or third pass, preparing the ground to be seeded again. Just imagine. Soon that will all be food, and we will have loaded caravans, leaving every week. A far sight better than life as a refugee in the big cities. Dominic agreed. Can the land even support that much? She asked. Dominic nodded. That's one thing that was clearly detailed in the manor's records. If they follow the instructions on crop rotation, the land won't have any issues. I will explain it all at the next meeting I hold. Tenna chuckled. Most of them should know about proper crop rotation, Your Grace. It's the water I'm worried about. Rain is unpredictable, and most of these farms have irrigation. Dominic realized where the disconnect had occurred. The irrigation cisterns are Magitech. They have water creation orbs embedded into them, or they did at one point. If drought hits, and the river is low, I will get the techno-wizards to help me repair them all. Chapter 249. Learning Curve. Dominic finished the wall just in time for dinner, but there was still no gate, so anyone could walk in and out of the estate. That was fine, he decided. They didn't want to make the house look unwelcoming, just like it could be properly secured. If they really did come under siege, he would be better off completing the wall and hanging a ladder for people to enter by than building a gate. Dominic turned in before dark, completely exhausted from the intensive magical output, and woke early the next morning, planning to head to the forge to create a few items for the Merchant Guild caravans. Pops had the production for the residents well in hand, and the forge should have more than enough room for them both. But Dominic was running low on spare parts for rifles, and he still didn't have his spells up to the level that clay to steel would create suitably high-quality metal to resell the pistols at higher levels. That was another thing that he should be working on, creating mana crystals to imbue into his book. However, Dominic had an idea. He might not have to create the crystals. He might be able to imbue the magic directly into the book using the same technique. If he just sat and focused on it for most of a day, he could likely get it from rank 9 to rank 10. That would make a small difference for most spells, but it would bring clay to steel a bit closer to perfection. Dominic joined Pops at the forge and tossed on his work coat, the leather one that would be spark-proof. Oh, the Duke is here among the commoners doing manual labor? Pops joked. Dominic laughed. What better forge to make noble weapons at than yours, Mastersmith? I warned you, didn't I? Once you start, you can't stop. But I understand why you're continuing. The duchy needs money as much as it needs people, and the Merchants Guild has more of it than anyone else. How many more tractors and other large pieces of equipment are you planning to buy? Pops replied. 1 more tractor, unless they bring 2 with the next caravan. Then we can start focusing on the smaller things and letting the shops in town be the ones who make most of the orders. I'm going to need to get the level of my spells up, so I will do as much forge work as I can in between training sessions. Dominic explained. Well, working the forge is better for it than most other occupations. I take it that you're making revolvers again? Dominic nodded in response. That's what they requested. By the time that most of the caravans realize they're in trouble, the ambush is already on them. So, their guards view pistols as more practical. I have some rifles for the huntsmen as well, but I suspect that we won't really need them with Alexis and the Royal Guard here. They have to be getting anxious to head out and check the area for monsters by now. Pops nodded. Well, they've got to do something to pass their days. Nobody expected a bunch of royal paladins to be content simply sitting around and looking at the interior walls of a manor. Being trapped in the palace was hard on the boys while you and the princess went gallivanting around Dagos without them. Dominic chuckled. He was absolutely certain that it was. They would need some time to forgive him and the princess for that, even if the plan to escape detection worked out just right. Then Pops gestured to the corner of the room. There are prepared blocks and blanks there for cylinders and frames. You can use that steel. I was expecting you to be here eventually. Dominic nodded, and started to place out his jigs and forms so that the pistols would come out identical to the ones he had produced before. They were much smaller than the ones for rifles, and within minutes, the happy sound of hammers on steel was the only sound in the forge as the two men worked. Dominic had just finished the first batch of cylinders when a knock at the door caught his attention. "Master Smith, did you have any chisels made? One of mine cracked," John called. Pops frowned and gestured for the carpenter to come in. "Keep working the bellows. I will get you a new one. It was your wide chisel, wasn't it? That one looked pretty worn." Pops asked. "Actually, the narrow one for cutting fitting joints. I hit a spike embedded in a log that I was trying to dovetail for beams, and it cracked up the middle." Pops nodded and came back with two chisels, the one that had broken and the one he expected to have broken. "I will put it on your tab. How is the work going?" he asked. "As well as can be expected. A few of the homes weren't in the greatest condition, and I'm replacing roof beams or floor joists for the lofted sections. They're livable, but we don't need a house coming down on someone's head." Pops nodded, and the carpenter rushed back to his work. "Never a slow moment," Dominic joked. "You have no idea. The steam fitter and carriage maker are hating life already. The farmers only have a vague idea of how to work the tractors, and they're not all good about slowing down for rocks and obstacles, so they've damaged more than a few parts and implements already. Nothing that will disable the tractors, but it's keeping the two of them working long hours, mostly overnight, so that the tractors will all be ready in the morning." Pops smirked at Dominic under his beard. Nobody had been brave enough to tell the Duke that they had broken his tractor, or to beg the techno-wizards to do more than make them more coal to keep them running. So, it had fallen on the carriage maker, who had lived in the core of a major city all his life, and didn't have any more experience plowing and seeding with expensive steam tractors than these rural farmers did. But they would figure it out soon. Chapter 250, Making Money. Dominic looked at the 4 mana revolvers he managed to make that day and nodded in satisfaction. All rare grade, all level 10. The sort of expensive weapon that only the most senior of guild members or noblemen could afford. But his storage still had a bunch of level 5 uncommon grade pistols made with clay to steel. Once he showed the merchant the good stuff, he could offer the cheap stuff as an alternative and make a bulk sale. One caravan was unlikely to want all 4 of the rare grade revolvers. They were simply too expensive. But offering them one plus some of the uncommon grade ones would do the job and keep the duchy funded. "What are your plans for the rest of the week?" Pops asked as Dominic packed up and cleaned his station for the evening. "I think that I will sit at the house and work on my spell levels. It's a vulnerability if someone comes to cause trouble." Dominic replied seriously. Pops nodded. "Best to do it now while they're still sorting things out in Albrol's. Once they're done there, and things really start getting bad, who knows what the situation will be. Fortunately, we have a number of former city guard officers in town. If they're armed, they should be able to help with small troubles." Dominic nodded. "I will start to organize them soon. I just don't want to start pulling people from establishing their homes to deal with a problem that hasn't started yet. If we start getting enough residents that we need a town guard to keep order, I will reconsider." Pops smiled and pointed to a block of clay in the corner of the room. "I don't suppose I could prevail upon your lordship to make me a block of copper? I need it for some of the tools and to make brass for the techno-wizards." Dominic laughed at Pop's irreverent tone. "It's just weird hearing you say that. The lordship part. I will make you the copper right away. That's got to be 100 kilos worth, so it should last you at least a few days." Pops wasn't so sure. They were expecting another convoy in a few days, and the first ones from Signia should be showing up any time. With how things were going, he couldn't guarantee that the steam fitter wouldn't buy out every bit of metal that he had on hand just to repair the convoys. Dominic returned to the manor for the evening as Pops continued to work. More often lately, he was sleeping at the forge after working late hours, so they would have to rebuild the smithy's house portion soon. But the old dwarf would still show up at the manor in the morning to get breakfast and bring lunch back to the forge. Things in the manor were beginning to settle into a state of normalcy, with the pantry and root cellar stocked, freshly ground flour and cornmeal in sacks stacked in storage, and the helpful garden which working to have the manor grow a fresh wave of produce. It was beginning to feel like home here already, and Dominic listened quietly as Alexis and the royal guard argued about which direction would be the best to go and search for roaming monsters and game animals first. There weren't any people to contest their claim if they went anywhere within the border regions of the Stantia province, so they could explore the entire holding and recommend upgrades to the barony manors that they found along the way. They were actually fairly close to the main ducal manor. Each of the barony estates in the region had been small holdings to begin with, barely 1,000 acres each in most cases. Now, that was more than enough for a minor lord to make a suitable living. But it also meant that most of the barony estates were only a few kilometers apart. They weren't usually large enough to have a full town next to them, only a cluster of farms and a few craftsmen's shops within the barony manor grounds. That made it slow going for the merchant guild caravans when the area was highly populated, but most of them weren't ordering or buying anything from every caravan. They would just signal the baron and wait a few minutes to see if they needed anything before moving along. Peasants didn't usually get that courtesy, unless it was a wealthy family. You had to flag down the merchant's caravan if you needed something and ask what they had, or go to a town where they would stop for a day or two and set up. We could expand the old baronies. Most of the ones in Signia are huge, much larger than what wavemates granted their barons. If I recall our peerage properly, the king only intends to assign 20 barons to 500 square kilometers. Dominic noted. And that is likely to expand, given how empty the region is and how few new upper nobles he will want to elevate. But how large were the old baronies? Alexis asked, ready to make notes on her map. About 4 square kilometers each, 1,000 acres or so. If they're built on a hill, you can usually see one manor from the next. Dominic replied with a shrug. The royal guards laughed. There will be so many empty barony houses that the wealthier commoners will want to move into. Wait, does that mean the larger family compound about 5 kilometers away was a separate barony? It's not fortified or anything, but it's a good stone house. Dominic tried for a moment to remember, then nodded. Yes, that was a baron. The farms around him were almost all run by his family, though. I don't think that there was anyone else living there. Alexis sighed. We're going to have to completely redraw the maps before the barons start to arrive. If barons simply decided not to have serfs so that they could claim the entire barony was family land, some of them will show up and find nowhere for farmers to live. Dominic chuckled. We should probably get some mechanical horses for that. Or just a proper stable of regular horses. Walking the whole thing would take forever. One more thing for the list.